Last week, I saw an announcement that the IRS had made an open source release of the software for the IRS's direct file system. That was a surprise, given that the US government isn't particularly known for open source releases. But then the other shoe dropped. Apparently, President Trump's big, beautiful spending bill will end the IRS direct file program. And that made me think about what might be going on behind the scenes.
Heather thinks about software.
Some of you may remember the $891 billion Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, possibly one of the most ironically named pieces of legislation ever written. Apparently, politicians in the US have never studied basic macroeconomics, which teaches us that massive deficit spending is in fact inflationary. If you don't believe me, well, fine, please go and try to reduce the deficit with the power of crystals. In that bill, the IRS was directed to create a system that allowed taxpayers to file their taxes online directly without charge. This system was named, wait for it, Direct File. The Biden administration spent tens of millions of dollars developing the system, and it launched for the most recent 2024 tax season. By creating a system that allowed users to file their taxes directly and free of charge, the US was coming into line with the practices of other nations. But the reviews of Direct File were mixed, and reading between the lines, highly political. Republicans claimed it was difficult to use and unnecessary given there were other free filing systems. According to the IRS, in 2024, over 400,000 users logged into Direct File and about 140,000 actually submitted accepted returns. That's a pretty low conversion rate, indicating that lots of people gave up before completing their filings or that they were not able to use the system successfully, each of these suggesting that the system might be difficult to use. Also, Direct File only files federal tax returns, and taxpayers also have state and local filing obligations, so it doesn't provide a turnkey solution. Moreover, the 2024 pilot was only available in 12 of 50 US states. There were plans to expand it to about half the states in 2025, but that plan will die on the vine if the program is terminated. And finally, the GAO, an independent congressional watchdog, reported that there were insufficient customer service agents to help users with the system. Democrats claimed that all this criticism was just big companies lobbying against a system that diverted income from them, the biggest culprit being Intuit, which makes TurboTax. And there is no doubt that such lobbying happened. But the truth probably lies somewhere in between. Government-developed software is usually pretty awful to use, and private software developers usually do better. But having a direct file system that is not too hard to use seems like a completely reasonable goal, and would be helpful even if it were only available to users of modest means. Also, anything that makes filing taxes easier can yield tax revenue for the US government. In general, it seems odd to defund the IRS programs in an attempt to balance the budget because the IRS are, the ones that collect the money. But the open source release was even more interesting. There is a philosophy that software developed with public funds should all be open source, an idea embraced in countries like Switzerland, Germany, and France. The US has been late to the party subscribing to this philosophy and expressing its preference for open source software in development contracts. The SHARE IT Act, a bipartisan bill passed during Biden's administration, is due to take effect June 21, 2025. It requires agencies that enter into software development contracts to develop policies to ensure that the entire federal government can use software developed at the government's expense. But it doesn't quite require an open source release. I'll link to the text of the bill in the description. So I am guessing that someone at the IRS learned that Direct File would be discontinued and just decided to comply with the SHARE IT Act a bit aggressively and a bit early. Could it have been a subtle act To throw shade on the Trump administration? Well, most of those acts are not so subtle. In any case, the code is released to the public domain. It is a rule in the US that works of authorship created by the US government have no copyright protection. But if the US hires a contractor to develop software, that rule does not apply, and either the contractor or the US government can end up owning the rights. In this case, it's clear that the basic direct file code is now in the public domain. I looked at the open source release, link in the description, and don't get too excited. It's not anything like plug and play. The average person could not come close to using it. There is an onboarding document that is probably helpful to developers, but most users' eyes would glaze over after the first paragraph. However, the release does mean that any developer has the right to use it to develop a free or low-cost system. Maybe we will see more competition in the tax filing business as a result. If you've used DirectFile, please share your experience in the comments. Liking and subscribing makes me think more.
Heather thinks about software.